to the Modern Maker podcast, the weekend edition, and I'm joined by a special guest, Jason Andrade from West Coast Sustainables. Jason is out here helping me install the solar panels on the solar-powered workshop that we're building for Home Depot. So this is another one of those cases of people sort of connecting over different ideas around making and building stuff, using the internet to share ideas, and reached out to me and heard that I was doing that and offered his assistance and has been teaching me and Mike from Modern Builds all about solar, all about off-the-grid applications. And I thought that was like would be a very interesting topic to a lot of you makers. So Jason was kind enough to join us. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks a lot. It's been fun.
So where are you normally based out of?
I'm based out of Redding, California, which is kind of the northern area.
It's a lot of hippies and...
it's a lot of everybody, actually. It's a pretty neat area. There's a lot of hunting, a lot of fishing. There's a lot of off-grid where we live. It's a pretty rural area. So there's really a lot of different things to pick from. But I travel probably about half of California, do a lot of stuff in the Bay Area because there's just a lot of neat projects to pick from.
So what is like a typical project that you're doing these days? Is it mostly residential, a mix of both? Or?
I mainly do residential, mostly grid tie stuff, but I'll selectively pick off-grid systems or battery backup for certain stuff.
All right. So that, my background's in sustainable architecture, and I think that's like one of the questions that people often have is like, what is the advantages of off-grid versus grid-tied, and how do you sort of look at that?
Oh, I don't know if there's necessarily an advantage. I would say that a lot of it is just property-based. Sometimes people are typically getting property cheaper because it's off the beaten path, or people just want to go more remote. So that's really the only power choice that they have.
Right.
There's also situations where they don't want to rely on the grid. They want to go rely on themselves. So off-grid is really either personality driven, or it's just driven by situation. That's
really good because and that's exactly why I wanted you on, is because you identified 3 different kind of scenarios that would all impact that decision. And it's not so much that like, hey, everyone should be off the grid, because that creates a lot of redundant infrastructure for storage and things like that. But so, for example, like, correct me if I'm wrong. So, for example, if you're going off the grid, a great reason to do that might be because you got a really great deal on land that's far away from utilities. And like normal developers like, no, that's too much money to stretch the power lines and stuff over there. So an off-grid situation, you might put more money into the batteries and solar to provide electricity in a remote location, but you're doing it and getting potentially land for cheaper or something like that. With grid tied, from what I understand, you don't spend as much money on the energy storage infrastructure, which can be expensive, like batteries and things like that.
Yes, I mean, exactly. I mean, really, when you look at off-grid, it's way more expensive, predominantly, because we're usually building off-grid stuff based on what people's budgets are. Very, very rarely do we have carte blanche just to go build the ultimate off-grid system. So typically we're building within a budget. And what's hard is you're really trying to forecast how much power a family is going to need over a duration of time. And you have to pay for all that mostly up front. Or you're going to spend a lot of money in generator subsidization, running your generator in the nighttime, or, to compensate for your extra loads. Where we as a society are used to coming home, turning on all the lights, doing your dishes, washing your clothes. When you're off grid, that's a different scenario. You're living more around the sun, more so than just kind of your lifestyle. Right. So it's a big lifestyle change.
And you have to kind of design the infrastructure to withstand the worst case scenario, which means that a lot of times you're not in the worst case scenario, which means you spent a lot of money on infrastructure that you're not using.
Yeah, it is. And I live off the grid 100% also. Yeah. And I mean, it would be great probably for the average family that didn't like to weld or, have a wood shop or make a ton of stuff. So just by having those hobbies as extracurricular, I have quite a substantial power system, which added extra cost to it.
What do you think there are some of the common myths that you encounter about solar and things like that?
I think the thing I hear most is people just say, I want to cut the utility grid and, cut the cord and go off the grid, not realizing that the lifestyle change really that it impacts people.
Right.
You really, when you cut the cord to go off the grid, you're assuming that reliability for yourself and making the power. And it's just not always as easy to do as it sounds, because you are the reliable person for that.
Right.
So I think that's really the biggest thing. There's just so much involved when you go off the grid.
Yeah, I think the thing that people often forget is that it involves two new functionalities. Energy production is one, and that's what they tend to think of, but energy storage and management is another one that's also equally important, that people tend, I think, it often gets like a little bit less press. People always like to like say solar powered house. The solar is generating, is the point of generation, but there's a lot more to it than sort of that. What would be like, you know, we're working on this solar powered workshop. Can you walk us through and just tell us like what are like the basic components of, in this case, this is an off the grid solar workshop. What are the basic components of a off the grid application, and like what does each one of them do?
So basically, the power production is made by the solar panels. From there, it goes down to the charge controllers, which regulate the solar to not overcharge the batteries. The batteries are your storage mechanism that hold all of your power until you're ready for it. And then we get to the inverter, which takes your battery-based power and converts it over to your house power. Those are predominantly your kind of power flow. And then you have a backup generator for the days that there is no sun.
Right.
You know, the real cat's meow is for people that have the ability to put in a wind turbine or put a hydro turbine to subsidize that extra power when the solar is not there. You know, when we talk about
stationary bike, something like that.
Yeah, they're coming out with us. That'd be great. You know, I'd lose weight and make power at the same time. You know, when we look at the cost breakdown of going off the grid, actually the solar panels aren't necessarily the biggest cost of it. It's typically the batteries. And especially with the newer batteries that are coming out with the lithiums and different chemistries, the batteries can actually be more expensive than what the solar panels are, because solar panels are at an all-time low. You know, they're not as expensive as they used to be, and now we're looking at the cost of the racking being almost equivalent on some of these expensive projects, like to do a pole mount racking that's adjustable for off-grid for seasonal. I'm spending just as much on a quality rack as I am on the solar panels. Yeah. So it's really, you know, the most expensive part right now is batteries.
Interesting. I mean, I saw that with this project. I mean, it was about equal what we spent on. We got a solar kit, which was 400 watt panels. And we actually got these kits from Home Depot. A lot of people don't know that Home Depot actually provides solar kits. You can order them online. I think it was about like in the sort of $1,100 to $1,500 range. You get 4 solar panels, the charge controller, and the inverter, and a little bit of the wiring for it. You don't get the batteries and a fuse box, which we had to supplement in. But I was impressed with how relatively inexpensive and how available they were. What is like, you know, if somebody wants to, let's say, do the most common application, and let's say they want to just add a little bit of solar to their home, still stay grid tied. What's like the process for that? Like, who do they call? Do they call an electrician first? Do they call a solar installer? Do they buy the panels first? Like, what would you be like? How would you advise somebody, a consumer, to go about taking those steps?
There's really a couple different ways. I mean, typically the turnkey method, of course, is just to call a solar company that specializes in solar. And really it's because they know the equipment that they're going to be installing. And it's also dealing with the building departments and the utility company, because installing the solar is just one aspect of what these people are actually doing, or the companies. Right. Integrating it into the utility and going by the rules that they have and doing what they call an interconnection or the net energy metering agreement. The paperwork portion of it sometimes is just as challenging.
Right, because you're feeding back into the grid.
Correct.
And isn't it like kind of a problem if like, because if something goes down, they need to shut off the grid, but the solar panels might still be feeding back into it or something?
So all of the systems now have what's called anti-islanding. If the grid shuts down, they all immediately shut down. So that is all super safe now. It has been for a long time. I think it's called UL 1741. That's been in place for quite a while. The hardest part is now that, like, for instance, for California where we're at, PG&E has met its cap of what they had to do for alternative energy. So now they're changing things where they're making everybody go time of use. We're starting to see now also in certain utility areas where the transformers they're full. So not everybody can put solar on now because the capacity is limited to how much they can actually put on. So you really got to investigate to make sure that you're in the right areas. So
yeah, I found that as well. Like when I was doing architecture in Massachusetts, you would hear a news report about how we have all these great statewide solar subsidies, right? And you'd be like, you get this rebate if you buy the solar panels, which pays for this percentage of what they cost. And you're like, that's awesome. I'm getting discounted solar panels. I'm going to go out and get them. But then you'll find out when you go to apply for the rebate that they already met their quota for the amount of money that they dished out for that year. And so there's none left. So even though that rebate is on the books, there wasn't any money behind it, for the people that came later.
Utility companies really have kind of become progressive in that, and now a lot of them are doing voucher systems to where before you go and get a system, you'll go to your utility company. Like where I live, we have the City of Reading REU, and they've actually done they've released a rebate, which is there isn't a lot of them out anymore, and you can go and get a voucher and then go talk to your solar companies, get estimates, and then take that back. And they've made it a really streamlined process to do that. So they've done better. It's really just trying to make sure that your transformer in your local area can handle the backfeed of solar.
What about those companies that lease solar to people? I've seen them get a lot of press about how you don't have to buy it, you don't have to put any money down. It's almost like a rent to own, or you rent them the space in your thing. They sound interesting. Well, what are your sort of thoughts on those?
I'm kind of anti-lease.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I'm somebody that's out helping people. I'd rather somebody buy a smaller system and help them put it in, and them do some of the sweat equity of putting the system in to not have to do a lease. Where leases are hurting people is if you plan on selling your home. Selling your home with a lease is actually going to affect the sale of your home, because like realtors, if they know that there's a lease on it, they're actually going to pass up on trying to sell your home, I think, because of the paperwork that they're having to go through to try to transfer that lease. So it's made complications in that area. But like anything, if you can't afford it and they're giving you like a guaranteed rate on your electricity, it sounds like a good deal. I think you just got to look at the fine print and see if it's an escalator loan, if in 15 years you're going to be paying more, or what the guarantee is, or the buyout. I personally don't do lease systems because I'm more proactive in trying to get people to buy the equipment and save a lot of the money up front.
Well, that leads to a question. It's like, what is like the cheapest, and like describe like a scenario that would be like very entry level, and like what would like it cost, sort of ballpark. And these are just estimates. No one's holding you to these, but like what is like for the solar for. We're working on a 10 by 12 workshop. It's going to have pretty minimal loads. We're mostly going to use it to power 18 volt and 40 volt battery powered tools, and maybe power like a drill press or a small contractor table saw. I think all in for the solar and batteries, not including the installation that you were so grateful to provide. Thank you. I think it's about like $2,500 to right around $3,000.
So when you look at that, we're right around $3 a watt. Now, with solar, typically, the more you do, the cheaper it gets. But if you were going to go buy the material, this will be a gracious plug, I buy everything from Wholesale Solar.
Right.
And when you look them up on the internet, they're probably number one for DIY kits. And they've made it very easy for people to go on, put in what their utility usages are, and find a kit that's very user-friendly to DIY install. The equipment that we have now with microinverters that are all AC powered are very safe to install. So you can, somebody that does a little bit of reading or has a friend that's a roofer or a friend that's an electrician can put the rack in and mount the panels and have a qualified electrician come behind and do the interconnection into the utility company. And they really can save a lot of money by putting these systems in. And there's so many pictures and so many videos and so much documentation. It's one of those things that putting a little bit of time and learning how to do it, somebody could really save a lot of money. It's just feeling comfortable with drilling a hole in your roof like we did today, finding your trusses. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Right. The solar part, you can understand how to do that, but really if you're putting it on the roof, it's making sure you're not going to have a leak. If you're doing a ground mount system, making sure that you check with the utility to make where the utility lines are. There's certain things that you just got to kind of foresee.
It was interesting today when we were working at it, and the conversation sort of came up that a solar installer is part electrician, but has to have a specific knowledge of different construction industries as well. Like you have to know everything that an electrician knows in terms of installing things, running conduit. You have to create the paths for those conduit within the building. and you also have to understand roofing to a really high degree to figure out, watching how you are going about, okay, these are composite shingles, we need this kind of flashing, we got to lift them up here, cut them away here, slide this back under, use this kind of caulking to seal it. Yeah, I think that's the thing that, as a former architect, I'm so acutely aware of how easy it is to screw up a roof and how catastrophic it is that anytime you add solar or something like that and you're adding penetrations through the roof, it's a little bit dicey.
It is.
And so, electrical stuff aside, it's just like, minimizing those penetrations and sort of, figuring out how to sort of do that in a safe way with the right flashing is pretty critical. What do you think of, and I have some strong opinions about this subject. So a lot of people have been asking me whenever the subject of renewable energy comes up about those, I heard Tesla's making solar panels that are awesome. And they look just like roof shingles. Mm-hmm. Can you tell people that those are not new? Those have been around for a while?
Oh, there is really neat stuff out there. There's a company, Luma Roof, right now that makes a solar roof shingle. Mm-hmm. It's a great product. It blends in. There's companies that have been doing it for quite a long time, and there is other alternatives like the Powerwall. There is great products out there that rival that are actually more powerful than the Powerwall.
Right.
What they've really capitalized on is sexy. Everything they've done, their cars are nice. Their Powerwall is going to be a great unit, I'm sure, once they get it up. It's very energy dense, so you have a lot of power within a small space. Right. But it's going to be interesting to see how the solar roofs really hold up, because we have more connections. Yeah. We have more places for failure. It's going to be a really interesting. What we've seen them really do is we've seen them evolve as a whole, Solar City and Tesla, from door-to-door salesmen of solar leases to hitting this upper-end market. Right. And we've seen that's kind of a paradigm shift, I think, into where they're heading, trying to get more money.
They're kind of doing the Apple thing. They're kind of becoming a luxury brand that's packaging up renewable technology. Isn't it also true that with when you're doing the building, from what I understand, photovoltaics, which is the sort of primary technology behind solar panels, there's sort of a diminishing efficiency of electrical output as they get hotter.
Well, there's two different things. We have deration, that the hotter they get, the less power they make, which is true with all electrical. Basically, it's like a glass of water. If it's hot and you can't see through it, your molecules are bouncing and it's slowing it down. That's the deration effect of solar panels or electricity.
So isn't that one of the problems with the building integrated, the ones that look like shingles, is that they're flatter on the roof, so there's less opportunity for heat to vent out?
Dispersion, yes. They're getting hotter. But I think what it really is coming down to is people, for some reason, don't like to see solar. It's an aesthetic thing that, unless it's done properly. I've had to put systems 300 feet over the side of a hill so that somebody didn't have to see them. So it's an aesthetic-based thing. I think
what's funny is I've thought a lot about this. I don't think it's so much that they don't like the way these panels look. I think they don't like the way they're added onto something, right? It's it's the addition, right? It's the thinking of something being sort of added on and not streamlined or originally intended into it. I think it's that addition. It's funny to me. I've talked to clients before and had them say they were showing me a picture of the house, and they're like, "Oh, I just don't want to add anything that looks like a modern technology on my old, more traditional house." Right in the front is this, satellite dish attached to it. I think it's I'm appreciative. I think Tesla is doing awesome stuff. So this is no shade on Tesla. I think see what I did there, shade. I think they're an amazing company doing really cool things, and they're getting people interested in new technologies. So shout out to them.
But they have so much behind them, backing them. When you look at the buildup of Solar City, so much of their stuff was granted by the Department of Energy. Yeah. There was so much that they had that, a business should succeed with that kind of backing.
Yeah. But, so it's I think it's, I think there's a lot of good things, but I think what you're sort of suggesting is don't just go by brand. There's a lot of great alternatives out there, and probably a lot more value per dollar with other options.
The thing is, right now, unfortunately, with this industry, we're we're really down to the last U.S. solar manufacturer there is with Solar World. Mm-hmm. And when we see this, I mean, when you look at most of the panels coming in from China, the one thing that Solar City has really going is that they're a strong company who looks like they're going to be around. So warranty based, if they start manufacturing their own panel, I think that's a great thing because we need to see more companies in the U.S. producing and going strong because it's like 1 versus 500 to 1,000. I mean, if Solar World fails at this point in time, that's going to be kind of a bummer that happened.
All right, so let's get back to some more like DIY questions and stuff like that. So, like, let's say I want to go to Burning Man again, and I want to say, okay, I need just enough. I need something to power. Recharge my phone, my camera, a fan, and maybe like a small mini fridge to keep food preserved. Could I use like one of those like Yeti little power systems? Would that kind of be enough for that? And like how many solar panels would I need to sort of plug into it? Or what would be like a good place? I mean, you mentioned it was a wholesale solar.
Wholesale solar sells more DIY kits. The Yeti we looked at last night was great. I'm also working with Humless, and they make a system like that where it's a lithium iron phosphate battery with an inverter. You can just plug the solar panels into it. More and more companies are making more portable power systems where everything is encompassed in a case, and all you're really doing is just plugging your solar panels.
So that's like something the size of like an ice chest or something that basically has your batteries, your charge controllers, your inverters, everything in there. It's almost just like a generator that you can plug solar panels in instead of gasoline.
Exactly.
And what is something? What's the name of that brand again?
Humless.
How do you spell that?
HUMMLESS.
Okay.
Or HUMLESS, something like that.
So, and you just Google them. And find it.
Yeah.
And so that's like, what do those run about?
You can go anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 on those because they have a variety of them. They have portable systems where you can put them in the back of your car and take them camping for the weekend. But then they have off-grid systems for backup for your home where you can get 12 kilowatt hours of storage.
So they're basically like a generator, kind of.
A storage generator.
Interesting. And so something like that would be more than enough for what I sort of described.
Oh, yeah.
And then from there, you could just like, how many panels would you need? Just like,
it really depends on how many lights you want to run. Everything with solar is really based on what it is that you're trying to power. If you're just trying to power lights in your fridge in an emergency situation, you might be able to get by off 6 kilowatt hours for a couple of days. It's really there's a lot of variables built into what it is that you're trying to power. But for instance, I live off the grid and I consume about 10 kilowatt hours a day. And I do a lot of other, fabricating and building on top of that. So, when you start adding swimming pools and hot tubs, those things are kind of unrealistic to power off the average off-grid home, unless you really start going into solar-specific items, which is really neat in this industry. I mean, we have solar well pumps, solar pond pumps, solar air conditioners, solar pool pumps. I mean, there really is so many things now that if you want to just take a specific thing, like let's say your swimming pool is your biggest usage, you can buy 3 solar panels and a solar pool pump and get your pool pump completely off your utility bill. So there's a lot of ways that people can kind of
so you can almost sort of like nickel and dime it and sort of eliminate energy expenses, so to speak.
Yes, and the neat thing about some of these items is if you want to put in a solar pool pump, you don't have to do a utility interconnection with that.
Right.
Because it's not really backfeeding the grid. So sometimes the simplicity of just powering those few items is easier because you're not having to deal with a local jurisdiction or change your utility program so that it benefits them. There is a benefit sometimes to doing that.
Very, very cool. And so you're also a bit of a maker.
Yes.
What are some of your projects that you're working on right now, or some ones that you got in the sort of pipeline that you're pretty excited about?
Right now, it's just wrapping up our house. We did our stair rehab where we did all with metal treads. We're doing some LED lights. We're really kind of lucky that some of our customers are waiting for me to finish our house so we can go do their projects and get them done. And then we'll jump back to finishing our maker station. And we're really excited to some of the collaborations we have coming up with other makers to come to kind of our off-grid place and really play with some of the stuff we have and kind of experience that, hey, you can run your table saw and your dust collector off-grid.
Right. So that's one thing. Is there are there any limitations? Like, can you run a welder like from a battery from a solar?
Yeah, with the application of enough money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really when we come down off-grid. It's really comes down to dollars. I mean, Before my last edition, I would run my generator if I wanted to run my welder or bigger loads. But, as I've saved up and got good deals, I mean, I now have a powerful enough system in our shop that I weld, plasma cut. I mean, there's no real limitations to what we can do now.
And so you recommend this wholesale solar place? They got good prices and good deals?
They have decent prices, but what they have is they have great support.
Gotcha.
And these are people that specialize in DIY, grid tie systems with battery backup and off-grid, and they've done enough of them, and they can build pre-built systems for people that want to do a lot of this stuff themselves.
So if my co-host Mike, if he ends up getting that bus that he was teasing on Instagram and needs like a power system to recharge, and run things, like that would be like a good source for that.
Yeah, you would just call up one of the people at wholesale, kind of give them an overview of your project, and they would help you pick out a kind of a pre-designed system or a customized system where they could sell you all the pieces with a diagram, and they would offer a fair amount of support to kind of help you put that system in.
Have you ever done any like solar thermal, like hot water systems, or what are your sort of thoughts on those? Like the evacuated tubes or like the flat plate collectors?
I think they're great. I like a lot of that stuff, but what we've kind of run into right now is that the cost of solar panels is so cheap.
Right.
It's typically cheaper now to do an electric heat pump water heater.
Right.
We're starting to see also now water heaters that are heat pumps like air conditioners.
Right.
That are more efficient. If you put them in your garage and you live in a hot climate like I do, it's going to cool your garage off and make hot water at the same time. So we have all these neat byproducts that are coming out of it, and it's just cheaper to add some more solar panels than to put, run water up to your ceiling. It's easier to run electrical wires than it is sometimes to plumb water, and liability-wise is a different issue.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I built my first solar-powered house when I was in college, so this was in like 2005. And at the time, we were using, to produce the hot water, we were using evacuated solar thermal tubes because we had a limited amount of roof space to work with because it was a small house. So it was, the solar to thermal conversion is pretty efficient. Like,
especially with like the Apricus tubes evacuated, they are very efficient.
But so you can, and I think this is one of the mistakes that people often have with technology. There's such a thing as like individual segmented efficiency, right? So if you're just just thinking of it on paper, those solar tubes are very efficient at turning sunlight into hot water. More efficient than, per square foot of sunlight than photovoltaic solar panels producing electricity and then using that electricity to heat up water. But from a system standpoint of designing the whole house, you need different installers. It's adding different infrastructure. You have to figure out how both these things fit onto the roof in their different sort of modularities and stuff like that. So I think that's like one of the things that with designing any of these things, it's weighing the individual efficiencies versus the sort of holistic ones.
And I think a lot of it too is solar as a whole is retrofit.
Right.
When we do solar, a lot of the times it's coming in after the project's already done. And if you were to come in and forecast ahead of time on a new construction, I think that including the hot water would be a great thing, because you would have the ability to come in and run these water lines and make sure stuff was done correctly. The real benefit, I think, to the solar thermal is it's not an electronic. And I think the more electronics we get, that you always have more mean failure rate. So you're picking something that's really a high efficiency item. I think really the best thing that somebody could do is build a net zero, high efficiency, super tight insulated home before even doing solar.
That's what we always recommend.
It's all design. I mean, I have a friend where I live, the energy docks, and if you really built a home that was extremely tight, well insulated, where we live, if you could reduce your cooling, you would be saving so much money, and it's non-technology based. You need
even just overhangs over the southern facing windows, so you're eliminating heat gain and stuff like that, to reduce the air conditioning load.
You really want to do as little technology as possible, because those are things that are not going to fail.
I always equate it with like sort of like a car design. Like if you want the car to be both like fast and fuel efficient, you don't necessarily start with the engine. You might start by like reducing the weight. And then any additions, improvements that you make to the engine is therefore going to be magnified because the car is lighter. And insulation versus, reducing sort of heat or cooling loads before you're going with the active sort of energy production technologies normally makes a lot of sense.
But when you look at a deep energy retrofit, which I think is what they kind of term it, that is almost expensive as adding a 6K grid tie system.
Yeah.
Because the labor that it requires to go in for these guys to suck out all your insulation, to do infrared testing on your house where all your leakages are, get up in the attic and seal all that. It's so extensive.
Yeah, retrofits are.
But see, we're still seeing new homes where the ducting for the insulation are suspended out of the ducting for the conditioning is suspended out of the insulation.
Right. They remove insulation to move the cold or hot air around.
So when you look at it, the fact that if your ducting was actually buried in your insulation, you'd have a much more efficient system. We're still building to old standards, not to new real philosophy that would be more efficient.
Awesome. So where can people find you if they want to reach out, chat with you about this? And I think you got where was the best place to sort of reach out to you?
Really, probably West Coast Sustainables on Facebook. We're redoing our website right now. It should be up soon. But we're on Instagram as West Coast Sustainables, Facebook. My maker stuff is Andrade Designs. We're kind of at those main locations and just pretty much like helping people out.
So Jason's an awesome guy. Be sure to check out his stuff. And Jason, thank you so much. Thank you both for the interview, and also thank you for helping me build my solar powered workshop.
It's been super fun.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well done, sir.
Good.